All right, got a Fender Champ from 1973, unmolested, and it's going to need all new electrolytics and some cleaning up of the AC wiring, the safety code, because what they have in here right now is not safe. It's got all the three tubes are original RCAs. They seem to be working fine. It's got some week-old electrolytics, both the filter caps and the cathode bypass caps. With the old caps, it is biased at about 10.7 watts idle with the wall voltage at 110, and about 13.5 watts idle when the wall voltage goes up to 120. So in stock form with the old caps, I don't need to do anything about the bias resistor. Let me find my pointer, which is here. But when I put all the new electrolytics in, especially the filter caps, I expect the voltages in the amp to go back up to where they should have been and were, 49 years ago, however long ago that was, 48 years ago. At which point I may need to increase the size, the value of this resistor here from 470 ohms. Kind of surprised this bypass cap here has lasted as long as it has, being right up against that resistor that gets hot. And there's a little futz that's leaked out of that resistor, so even aside from any changes, I think it's time for a new 470 ohm resistor there. Now, the big consideration in these is the can multi-section caps. The ones that are available now are not great, and just due to the physical layout of the thing, it's without drilling holes, it's difficult to fit new caps in here. In the past, I have carefully drilled holes for terminal strips to hold axial caps or terminal strips to hold radial caps. I think given the relative ease of working on these champs, I'm going to roll the dice with a new multi-section can from CE and hope it's good. And I'll replace all these electrolytics here. All these, all three of them. It's a very simple thing. But sometimes when things are really simple like this, the bar is even higher to do good work. So this will be fun. I'm going to order some parts, get everything cleaned up, and then see where the bias is at that point. And I would not be surprised if this 470 ohm has to go up in value a little bit. Everything else measures quite good. Continuing with this champ, it's time to get some things disconnected while this big chassis iron heats up. People ask, this is a Weller SPG80L. In the past I had a 120 watt chassis iron. It was too much. It just burned the hell out of flux. And I found that this works really well. And I've got this fairly large chisel tip, which means I can use just the point for smaller things, or I can use more of it for larger things. Anyway, it is heating up. It takes about 10 minutes, which will give me time to do some other stuff I want to do. Now, let me snip this old bit here of zip tie. I'm going to be moving this AC safety ground from this transformer mounting bolt to a chassis location. We're going to undo these connections here from this transformer mounting bolt and do it straight to the chassis there. This is the HT center tap and one of the heater wires. On some champs, I would undo the heater supply from the chassis and take that off ground and run new heater wires all throughout. But these things are usually okay as they are. We're going to try to do this kind of what's the best way to put this? I'm not going to do it original to this amp, this 73 or 77, 73. Check the iron again. It's been a couple days since I recorded the first part of this. 1970, according to the date code on the 71 here, 70 here. I think that snap says 73, so 73. I'm not going to do it like it was in 73. I'm going to do it like it was a pre-CBS, but these grounds straight to chassis. So while the big iron is heating up, I'll use my regular iron, which is a Hacko 936. I've got it set to about 725 Fahrenheit. And again, I like this fairly small chisel tip for these because I can use one side for a small thing or the full one for a big one. And we're gonna get ready to change out this main filter cap and do these grounds. If I can get all these wires and cables to play along. That's why I don't have the, I gotta unplug the cable that's powering the phone. I was trying to charge it as I did this. It's just not gonna work. That's why I don't have the lav mic. It'd be one more cable to be drifting where I need it to be, getting in the way. So I heat up that connection with some fresh solder. Just disconnect these. And those will get reconnected directly to chassis right here. But first I'm going to take off this mounting screw. I'm kind of doing this just because I can, and I have to heat up the chassis iron anyway with a Vibrolux or larger amp. I find it's very necessary because the weight of the power transformers deforms the chassis over time. With a Champ or a Princeton, this is almost a theoretical benefit because the steel chassis does not get deformed by the weight of those small transformers. Deluxe reverbs are kind of in the middle. That's kind of a judgment call. Though I find that you do get a much better ground to chassis than you do to chassis mounting hardware, particularly if that's not reinforced by solder. So on these two over here, I'm just gonna tighten these up. If I get this to go on there, because they work a little bit loose, which is another reason not to use these for grounds. And got this lock washer soldered to chassis here. I'll get that out in just a minute. Make sure there's not any crud here. There's a little bit of dirt and stuff. If this were being used for a ground, I'd have to clean this very, very thoroughly. Just want to get some of that excess gunk out and put this caps nut in here and tighten it really well. Doop-a-doop-a-doo. Okay, let's move this to the side and undo these connections at the filter cap. Let's see, I think they're just tucked in there. I can just heat them up and pull them out. I've already made sure that this is discharged with no voltage. So there's my screen. Preamp. And here's a reservoir. Now reservoir is where it gets a little bit tricky. If you look at the schematic, they show 20-20-20. And there's an unused section in a lot of Champs because they use these 4-section 20-20-20-20 caps. But you will see a lot of factory Champs using 2 of the 20 microfarad sections for the reservoir. Gives it 40 microfarad, which gives less hum. Now, while that works very well, it can cause a little bit of stress on a 5YG3 rectifier tube, which is supposed to have nothing more than like 30 microfarad capacitance there. That said, this original RCA is still good from 1973 or whenever. So it's possible that you can use 40 for the reservoir without any issue, even though that's more than the datasheet recommends. What is also a safe bet, and what I'll probably do on this app, is you can have 20 for the first reservoir node, so there's no stress on the rectifier tube, and then use 40 for the screen node, which gives pretty much the same filtering benefit to the downstream stuff. And that's what I'll probably do. Now, while you can get a 20-20-20-20 cap, I got this 40-20-20 cap from CE, and these are rated for 500 volts each, and I measured them, and it's actually 43 microfarad, 22-22. So given that it's 43, not 40, so it's even that much higher than the original spec max for a 5Y3G rectifier tube. I think it's another reason to use that 40 microfarad, 43 microfarad cap for the screen node. Now, before I pull this old cap out, let's measure what this 48-year-old capacitor actually is in terms of its capacitance this week. Each one of these is supposed to be 20 microfarad. $25.8, 27, 33, 32. So they had these two tied together, 33 microfarad and 32 microfarad, not 20 and 20. So this wasn't 40. This was 65 microfarad. And that would be pushing the capacitance rating on a GZ34, a 5AR4, let alone this poor little 5Y3. So we are not going to use this cap. I'm sure the ESR is not great in this thing. This has not failed yet, but it wants to. It's ready to. So that's another reason to change this, even though it has not failed. That capacitance has changed over the years. First, I'm going to prep the new connection for the AC safety ground. And the hot and neutral are going to get changed in this amp as well, because they are not to modern safety code. Get that death cap. We're going to take the death cap out. And we're not going to fuse the neutral. Thank you very much, because that way you can have a fuse below and still have live voltage on the inside the chassis, or potentially on the chassis. Disconnect that. And then they have that hot going straight to the power switch, and we are going to route that to the fuse instead. Sorry about the lovely camera work here. I am not a YouTube channel that fixes amp. I'm a guy who fixes amps, who sticks some of the more interesting stuff up on YouTube. So the focus is the work, not the video. So sorry if my cinematography suffers from time to time. At least I don't have to have choreography, because that would be horrific to watch. I'm just going to push this through. These power switches on champs are the same switch used in other Fenders for bright caps, and they're very, very fragile. And I've had to replace more than my share. So I'm going to be gentle with it. If it will allow me to. It's all boogered up. Gotta cut a little bit more off that old wire. Where there used to be a bend, the wire just got too thick to want to go through that hole. All right. So I need to disconnect the old primary connection from this fuse holder. This is where the neutral will connect to this primary. Let's see if I can do this first try neatly on camera. Not too bad. I'm going to be snipping that shorter and tying it to the neutral from the power cable in a little bit anyway. So this little bit of end here is designed to be sacrificial for my purposes. I'm going to remove the old death cap because you no longer need to have the neutral tied to ground. There are ways to reduce line noise if that's what you're thinking, but having the neutral with the capacitor chassis is not the way to do it, and it's not really necessary. So I'll return this with the amp in case some collector wants it. It's just a 47 nanofarad 600 volt standard stuff for Fender. So the hot is going to go here, and it can be shortened quite a bit as a result. The neutral is going to be spliced and heat shrinked to this primary, so it can also be shortened quite a bit. And that leaves the ground wire much longer than the other two. So back to modern safety code. If this cable were to pull out of this amp, the ground connection would be the last one to break. So if the hot one broke and tried to put live voltage on this chassis, be it ground potential, the fuse in the amp would trip, or the circuit breaker in your house would trip. Either way, you are very unlikely to get electrocuted. This chassis would not be able to go live, even if you had a 20 amp circuit in your house instead of the correct 10 or 15, because it would be a complete dead short. So I'm going to tend this wire here in preparation for when I have a chassis ground point ready for it. All right, let's see. I think I'll reuse this existing chassis ground here for the AC safety ground, because it's already there and tinned and everything. There's no need to waste it. I don't need to put. Normally I would put another one over here. You see over here? Yeah. I don't know how much of this you can see. Sorry, I've been looking at the work, not looking through the phone lens. Let me make sure that you're seeing this stuff. It's hard to do this. This is about as close as I can get the camera to it, just because the tripod. I can do it a little bit better. Make sure it's still in focus. I want you guys to see this stuff, but I don't want to have to suck in my gut for the next 30 minutes. So, all right. Got some old flux here on this old solder joint. I like to clean that off. And I'm gonna hit that spot. Just a little bit of ISO on a paper towel. That'll get all that powdered flux off. It'll also clean the top level of that solder joint before I add anything fresh to it. So I'm not going to be mixing old contaminants into the solder joint. Move this heater wire up away from where the heat's going to be. And this will be a good test to see how hot the chassis iron is. While I'm at it, I'm going to get that old bit of lead from the old ground cap out. Okay. Add just a bit of fresh solder and flux to that with the iron on its tip. So I'm using a fairly small amount of the iron. And here we go. Alright, that is solid. And that'll just tuck underneath. Let me get this old solder off the fuse holder real quick so I can get those wires out of our way a little bit. I should probably do all the AC wiring first, but I want to get to some of the more fun stuff. It's always fun getting stuff out of the eyelets of these fuse holders because they're never at the right angle. And then when you get them right lined up, they want to move on you. I go through a white tip a week on these things because they melt. There we go. Now, I don't think I've ever shown this in a video, but I don't know if you can see it, but these fuse holders and a lot of things in old amps get kind of a brown coating on everything. I like to get in there, just kind of scrape it away. It's old flux and it's old funk and all kinds of stuff. I just use a small flathead screwdriver, which can break through the outer layer, but I'm not using enough force to scratch or abrade the metal beneath. Get this side we can't see. And then, once again, a little bit of ISO often does wonders for these things. Just getting what the bits of dust and stuff that a screwdriver doesn't want to get up. This is stuff that would have been between us and a new good solder joint. Think of it as time travel, sadly without dinosaurs. All right, now tin the parts afresh. Adding that flux to it really thoroughly cleans it off. So my next stuff will really bond to it well. All right, so the hot's going to go there. And with old factory wire like this, you never know what you're going to get. Some of the later 70s Fender power cables, the wire itself is just full of this like plastic gunk. It's really hard to solder to. This one's fine, but a lot of times I'll replace, if it's a 76, I'll end up replacing the power cable just to know that I've got good stuff to work with. Okay, I need to get my braid and get a little bit of solder out of that eyelet. The other reason I often change power cables on later 70s Fenders is the grounded power cables in those that have that red plug. Let's see if this one has one. I don't recall. All right, this one is already a replacement. This is not the Fender original. That's why this is good wire to work with. The original ones have a red plug on them. And the ones with the red plug, the coating of the cable itself is this really soft rubber that does not react well to ozone and stuff over the decades. And it begins to degrade, and it also pulls out from whatever clamping force the red plugs used to exert on it. So you often have a spot at the very end where there's nothing clamping the cable. You can see the wires beneath, which means that there's a lot of stress on those wires, and someone could touch them accidentally while plugging or unplugging the amp. And if there's a nick in them, all of a sudden you get electrocuted. Now, I've had people put in comments that getting electrocuted is not that big a deal. Kind of startles you, feels weird, whatever. It all depends on a lot of factors. Depends on the current, the voltage, etc., etc. But also conditions on one's health. What can just be an unpleasant tingle for a young, healthy person can be a surprise heart attack for a young person who had a heart condition they were unaware of, or seemingly the same conditions that give one guy a mild shock can kill someone else just based on the same amp conditions and different environments. All right. Now this connection, I'm going to get a little bit more off here because there was already a nick in this. This nick was not mine, but let's just take some more off. This connection I'm doing between the neutral and the primary. There are a lot of very fancy ways to do this with NASA splices. It's alignment splices, and I know how to do all those. I don't find that's really necessary on these, to be honest. There's not a ton of current, and if everything else is done right in the amp, there's no strain on the connection. And it's very hard to do a good lineman's splice or NASA splice on these wires. It's doable, but it's a lot of work and only have a short amount of original primary exposed on that power transformer. And I'd rather not have one shot at it because those are difficult splices to do with a wire of this diameter. So I just do that wrap around each other and then solder them together. If I were really worried about the strength and strain on this joint with this very basic splice here, I would install a little terminal strip in the amp and have them soldered together into the same thing. Now I'm going to snip a little bit of excess. And where did I just see these things? Let's see, which diameter is going to fit that? That's too small. Well, later I'm going to find my heat shrink. I've got a whole bunch of it and slip about a 1-inch piece on there and shrink that down over both of those. I'll show that later. For right now, while I do other work on the amp, just to keep myself from being exposed potentially to anything. Now that is the neutral. Quick and dirty safety for me on the bench. I can remove that very easily when I want to, no residue. But in the meantime, it's not going to be a problem. So next I'm going to do something which is going to be weird to people who read a lot on the internet about amps versus people who work on amps. I'm going to use some of this 22 gauge yellow cloth covered wire to run a new line from the fuse to the power switch. And this is only 22 gauge. And in certain amps with a lot of current, I would want to use an 18 gauge just for overkill. But two things. First of all, this is just a champ with very little current. Three things. Champ, very little current is number one. Number two is a very short distance. What do you think of this? 5 inches. And the current capability of any given diameter wire is the wire diameter, the gauge, is one factor. The other is the length. And so if this were a 10-foot connection for this amount of current, I would probably need 18 gauge. For 4 inches of this amount of current, a 22 is just fine. And the third factor being, this is exactly what Fender used for the power wiring in all the 60s amps, including the Twins and Showmans and other stuff where there was more current than there is present on a champ. Now granted, again, most of those wires are 5 inches or shorter because Fender was very aware of the same current capability issues and what all the variables are. So this will actually be what Fender would have done in 1965, 64, if they had wired a champ up to modern electrical safety codes. And this will work absolutely fine without any issue. And I like to give each one of these a little bit of mechanical support, even though Fender certainly by 73 usually did not. They just would poke a wire through a hole and solder it. If you have a problem with a Fender in 73 because a solder joint comes loose, you take it back to your dealer and they say, well, Fender messed up. But Fender is just some faceless corporation. If I give this amp back and something's wrong, no one's going to say Fender messed up. They're going to say Lyle messed up. So, with great power, blah, blah, blah. All right, let's get this old ground lug out here. All right. And just like on the AC safety ground, I get this old nasty flux out. With a caveat. There are factory date codes inked on the chassis here that I would like to keep. I can't make too many promises about that because the next bunch of stuff that's going to happen. But if I get in here with some isopropyl alcohol right now, in addition to the old dirt and flux, the ink stamp will go away. So I'm going to take this chassis over my trash can and brush off that stuff real quick. All right, just a second, we'll walk to the hallway and steal some of my wife's Q-tips. All right, with these I can do a little more targeted cleaning than just a bit of paper towel. I feel so dainty. All right. All right, let's put a fresh Kep's nut on there before we do anything else. Let me get my box. Oh, things. Where's my big box of hardware? Here we go. I could, of course, have had this out already, but that would require much more planning and preparation. So a brand new 832 Kep's nut. I'm doing this first because when I do that solder, I don't want any solder to be beneath where the Kep's nut is going to go. It's fine if a little bit of the solder gets on the Kep's nut, but not under it. All right. Just flow a little bit of fresh solder there where we're going to be working. You have to be careful. You don't want to end up with a huge puddle. But at the same time, you have to have a good connection. I think I'm going to, because we've got so much of this, I think I'm going to shorten these a little bit. I'm going to do the ground wire separate from the other two though, just in case a future owner wants to have this converted to a true bipolar heater supply. So I'm going to cut these right by here. For anyone worried that I'm cutting wires on a 73 Fender, it's okay. It's a 73 Fender, but I'm a 71 tech, so I've got seniority. On these two, I'm going to speed the process along. And bring them together as one. Just because you don't want a whole bunch of wires pulling out of the joint when it sets up. That's one of the downsides to a big chassis ground like that. It takes a while for everything to get hot, which means it takes a while for everything to get cool, and things like to move. So this is going to be first. That will be good. A little excess at the end I'll snip off. Okay. Now I'll try to do this one just to the side of that. So plenty of room for someone to splice on a new heater wire if necessary in the future. And be easy to separate this from the other two without the whole thing coming apart if desired. So let's tin that. Add that to the mix right next to the others. All right, I'm gonna hold the whole thing down now. Ah, see, there it goes. Try to work on the side. All right, that's not lovely. So let's add a little bit more. And now it's a tricky bit. Where's the one I want? I've got every screwdriver in the world but the one I want. Aha. Lost one in the process, but the entire joint got prettier. Damn it. I do this all the time, get beautiful results. Try to film one from start to finish, and this one decides to act up. All right, I'll try with pliers instead of the screwdriver. Maybe I can get some side-to-side support. I just like it to be shinier and prettier than that. And it's a catch-22. The more you heat it, The farther away from shiny and pretty it can be, you got to be kind of careful with that. I've got them all embedded well. A little more pretty solder on top. Alright, it is not the prettiest one I've ever done, but it is very solid and reliable. So, again, this is about fixing the amp, not making pretty videos. Now, the next one is every tech's least favorite. Multi-section can cap like you get on a Champ or a Princeton, because it can become a nightmare with solder going everywhere. You get a lot of these that come in with where they did not have the proper iron to do it to begin with, and you just get terrible messes and inadequate solder joints. So I heat this up, try to work just where it is and not let it pool, and suck out the excess. Alright, now that's to the point where I should be able to heat it up. And begin to pry it up a little bit. Just get some space under there. This one's not wanting to cooperate. The first of the two is always the toughest. The second one, you can heat it up and just kind of rotate it, and life is much easier. My goodness, this is not being fun. Let me try this again with the heat and the prying. The issue here is that I'm heating up a huge area of the chassis as well as the body of the cap. So it takes a while for that heat to spread and melt all the solder I'm dealing with. And just the radiant heat of the damn iron is almost too much for my right hand as the heat rises. Alright, but that's a very good thing right there. Getting that cap up off the chassis just a little bit will dramatically speed up the rest of the process. Because this will begin to focus the heat on that tab rather than on the chassis. Alright, we're almost there. Someone was commending me for my patience with that bus wire on that rick pot last night. Many times doing this instills a good bit of patience. So a Rickenbacker in comparison is nothing. Now I can get some more of the solder up. I'll just kind of pool it together first. I've had these where they just pool perfectly and come up in one shoot. But not today when the cameras are rolling. Alright, but that's separated from the chassis there. On this side. I'll make sure it's all the way off. Alright. Now at this point, when I heat this one up, I should be able to just rotate it. Boy, that cap's warm on the other side. Now looking where the solder is and is not, I should be able to turn this clockwise in just a moment. Alright. Like I said, that makes things a lot easier. So now I just find my little screwdriver, start the bend. Try not to scratch up the chassis as I do this, so just a little bit at a time. Let me get some of that solder a little bit flowier. The solder itself can make a thick spot so it doesn't want to bend back up. All right. Let's see if this just comes out now. Oh, duh. Well, it spins nicely, but these two have to come up before I can pull it out. As I would have known if I was thinking, you know, just a fraction of a bit. Let me turn this so it's easier for me to reach. Did I mention I'm much smarter off camera too? Everything is easier. I'm much smarter as soon as the camera stops filming things. Should I still say filming since no film is involved? I'm not sure how the verbiage is changing. All right, so this old cap is out. Now it's time to remove this old solder. And let me find something to stick under this chassis so it doesn't want to wobble so much. I think this pair of 6x6 tube box will work. Okay, yeah, keeps it just enough. All right, let's do this one here. All right, once I get to that point, it's time to go to the braid. And cut a section off so I'm not trailing 4 feet of this stuff for this. I want to work from the ink away, starting at the ink side and working towards me, so I'm not pushing things over the ink. I like to get all the old solder off whenever possible. I'm not concerned like to the molecular level, but that's a good place to be. Now I get the old flux off. When you see me doing this, I'm just using enough force, really just the gravity of this small flathead screwdriver to break the flux. I'm not scratching the chassis. Flux wants to be a powder. So I'm not scratching the steel by doing this. Back to the Q-tips. So I can control it. Be very, very careful around the old chassis stamp. See all that yuck? That's what we don't want in our new solder joint being used for ground. Okay, out with the old, in with the new. So let's get this started. And I think the easiest way is going to be just to press this down evenly and put pressure on the two opposite ones first. I'm trying to press this down and get it exactly flush against the edge of the chassis, which wants to move. And I don't want to slip and put a scratch in the chassis. So we start it just to get that first pressure so that it'll be easier on the subsequent ones. All right, that's good. If anyone has a fantastic idea of a tool that does this better every time, I would love to hear it. I rotate this so it's away from me for this next one. All right, now let me confirm which section is which. And yeah, I've got the D and square and triangle, but I can also just do this. It's really only the 43 that I want to know. That's that one. That's going to be my screen supply. So here's reservoir, here's screen, here's preamp. So let me rotate this. Let's see if I can figure out what's going to be the most. I think this will be the best orientation for what I want. Yeah, all right. So time to recreate those solder points on the chassis. And this is where I like this large tip, because I can really control what's getting heated and how much. I'm going to press this down a little bit better first. Alright. Start with this one that has the hole first. And over here, the really tricky one, by all this ink. If you don't have a good hot iron suitable for chassis work, this is about impossible. And I am far from the only tech who's had to fix people's efforts who don't have the right iron for this. And the right iron is only about 80 bucks, so you know, not something most people would need to have for their standard solder work if they make cables and stuff. But if you fix someone's amp, you have to have the right gear. And I want this to be solid without it being a puddle. I'm trying to heat up the chassis and the tab on the capacitor and the solder beneath it and all around it at the same time. It takes a lot of heat to do that well. Alright, that feels really good. And I think I'm done with the chassis iron, so I'm going to unplug that. Okay, now I got some fresh excess flux on things. Not too much. But I like things to be pretty. So, return of the Q-tip. Being very, very careful not to approach that ink. All right, that's pretty much rock solid. All right, so I've got 40, 20, 20. So let's do the preamp one here. And I'm gonna leave all that original excess in place. Don't need to trim the wires down shorter, though I would if this were a fresh build I was doing. Actually, I'm gonna tell a lie. I don't like the way they just tuck those leads in there. So snip. Expose some fresh wire on this. I like to have a mechanical connection. Yeah, I know the old one lasted all this time. But, like I said, if something goes wrong now, it's not some anonymous person at Fender who messed up, it's me. And this way I will know that every connection is good that I touched in the amp. So there's the preamp. Screen will go here. I'll do that one last. And here, filter. While this will look different than the old one, which had 4 sections, again, those 4 sections were all 20. I ordered a cap with this 40, 20, 20, which is electronically equivalent. Snip off a little bit of excess there. Doesn't really matter, but I like to have it look as neat as possible. And get that little snip out. I'm going to solder those two, then I'll do the screen node. This wire in the amp was pre-tinned, and it was stranded tinned already, so I didn't have to tin it before doing this. It's pretty good stuff, actually. All right, I'll snake this one between the other two. And I don't have as much slack on this one, so I'm going to straighten out the old one. Just expose a little bit of fresh wire here. And again with the mechanical. Now the other day when this amp came in, I believe I measured those 2 dropping resistors already. Oops. $1K. 10K. So we're good there. There's not a lot happening in a champ. So next is time to do these cathode bypass caps. So I'm moving this on down here. And we're gonna do these 3. They're all 22s in this amp. The Vibro champ's got like a 2 in it, I think. And as I mentioned before, when I replace this cap, it's going to be farther away from this bias resistor. And as I mentioned before, I expect probably we'll need to change that bias resistor to get it where it will be a better bias setting for this amp with modern wall voltages and the new filter caps, which will probably increase the B+. We'll find out soon. For right now, I'm just removing the old caps. I think what I'm going to do here is, depending on the instruction, I'm going to lift these cathode wires out, get some of this old solder out so I don't have puddles beneath the board as I do this. It's real easy just to stick new resistors in the old solder joints, but then you always have to add more solder and you end up getting puddles beneath that can break loose and bad things can happen. So we will do that the right way. All right. The difference between this amp and, say, a 64 champ. With the 64 champ, would have a lot of these leads J-hooked beneath the board, and you would not be able to just pull them out like this. These are just tucked in. By 73, they cared a lot less, which is a problem in many post-72 Fenders. The champ's so simple that it really doesn't mess things up too much, but all right, we're gonna get the old solder out of those eyelets. Doesn't have to be perfect. I just don't want a bunch of excess puddling up beneath where I can't see it. Or having solder blobs loose between the two boards and drifting around and potentially shorting things out. See, that one had a lot of solder in it. All that came from just that one eyelet. There was a lot in there. All right. All right, now I like to break up the old flux while I'm in here. Scrape it away if it's on the edge of the eyelet. All right. A bit of ISO to clean up all that stuff and the area around each eyelet. those areas of the board in general. I'll move this bias resistor a little bit to the side, where either it will stay or the new one will be. I'm going to go a bit to the right on its replacement a little bit. Make sure there's no alcohol down in those eyelets. If there was, it won't be after I hit it with the 725-degree iron. You hear that? There was some down in there. It's all evaporating out from that heat. All right, that'll be good. All right, got these little Vichy 22 microfarad 63 volt caps I love. Seriously overrated in pretty much every criteria for the purpose here. Not expensive. They're only rated for 85 degrees, but that's 85 degrees at 63 volts, and there's not going to be either of those factors present in any of these uses. In other amps, I will go with 105 or even 125 degree rated cap. Those tend to cost a good bit more, but where that's overkill. If I got to put 6 caps in an amp, and I can either use $6.50 caps or 6 $4 caps, whatever gets the right amount of quality and reliability for the least amount of money is good. And for most Fenders, this is an ideal capacitor without spending 2 and 3 times as much per amp on cathode bypass caps. In a perfect world, I'd have each one of these centered on the board, but the resistors in the amp, original to the amp, are not centered, as you can see. So I'm just kind of made it to their resistor. Start down here at this ground. Just fill that up. And at this end, nice fillet of solder. Just take that in for now. I will dome them all in a little bit. The doming is pretty much just for looks. This is actually more than adequate as it is right now. And if this were for NASA, it would be preferred as it is right now. But Fender domed things, so I domed them. As I mentioned in a video the other day, I really try very hard to have the value, both the capacitance and the voltage of any cap I put in, visible from the top, so that future techs won't wonder what was used. And I'll put a recap date on a piece of painter's tape inside this chassis in a little bit. So the next tech will be able to know this was done in October of 2021, because modern capacitor date codes are harder to suss out than the old ones. And if this amp comes to a tech in 5 years, I want the tech to know that, oh, all the caps were changed 5 years ago, as opposed to sometime between 1990 and now. last one on this bypass cap. So I want to, well, they're all bypass caps, but for the one on the output cathode, I want to get a nice bend in this wire so I can keep this well away from that hot resistor, but not touching that screw. Always make sure that the leads cannot touch that screw. Right there. Arrgh. Right there. Having some issues here getting this one to go back in. Oh, I'll just bring it in front of the cap then. No. There we go. All right, that looks pretty damn good. While I am at this point, one more thing, let me double check. Make sure the speaker jack connection is tight to chassis. I already checked the input jacks and the pots are tight and clean from the other day. So I think it's time to put the tubes in and fire this up. I am going to do some prettier domes on these, but I like to keep my method on that my little secret. All right, I haven't domed these because I might change this resistor. I've domed the other ones. I measure the bias now for cathode bias single-ended. I've already measured that resistor. I'll measure the voltage across it. $18.45. Plate to cathode. $385.6. And that tells me that this tube with 119 volts coming out of the wall is biased at 13.48 watts, which is half a watt less than the minimum, than the maximum for a 6v6 in this amp. It's a 12 watt tube. Cathode bias can often handle 14 watts. This is a single-ended Class A. Not a Class A like a AC30. Class A, when it comes to that, is pure marketing BS. They're Class AB amps. This is an actual Class A amp, single-ended. Given that the wall voltage is 119 and we're at 13.48 watts idle dissipation, and the wall voltage in Memphis often spikes up to 127 or 130 different times of the year, as well as dropping down to 108 in the winter. I don't think that resistor is a good choice for this amp. I think that needs to be increased. It's nominally a 500, and I think we need to increase the value of that. So let me pause here and get a different 2 watt or higher resistor in place there and see where the bias is at next. All right, amp's unplugged. Everything should be drained to voltage now. Let me verify that before I get zapped. 18 volts. All right, so it's down to 18 at this point. Let me go ahead and drain that down a bit more, though I don't think I have any ill effect from 18 volts. So I'm just going to touch it to a plate resistor right here, and it's going to drain through the dropping resistors and this plate resistor, which will give us a controlled drop. Down to 10. All right, I'm going to drain it through just the dropping resistors now. All right, down to nothing. All right, let's change out this cathode bypass cap here and the output. And that will be returned with the other original parts in the amp. And since I did not add a bunch of solder when I was putting it all back together, I don't have to take out a whole bunch again now. So, new 2 watt metal oxide. Should be pretty much ideal for the purpose. My pliers go. Went from that 500 to the 680 because that's the next standard resistor value. It's not like I could choose a 573 or anything like that. Sometimes I've got to make a value that doesn't exist, or I've got an order a very strange value. But I think in this case, the 680 will do us really well for a good sounding, long-lasting champ. Add a little fresh solder to neaten that up. Notice the relatively extreme distance I have here between this 2 watt resistor and its bypass cap. Damn it. I don't want the bypass cap to get overheated by any radiant heat from that resistor. A little bit more over here. Make sure it's really good in there. Damn it. It's only because I'm trying to film this. Okay, I'll clean that up later if this resistor makes the cut, which I expect it to. I'm going to get it a little bit up off the board, just in case anything that should go wrong, while making sure it's got a physical distance to these wires, just in case the body of it got hot. All right, let's start the bias process all over again. So, amp is off. Measure across that resistor to confirm. It's nominally 680. Measures 678 ohms. Power that amp on. All right, new resistor in place, 120 volts mains. Across the cathode, I've got 21 volts, as opposed to 15 something. And plate to cathode, pretty much 400 on the dot. It's fluctuating by half a volt. Which means that this tube is now idling at 11.77 watts, which is pretty much right at the data sheet, 12 watts for a 6v6. So that's pretty much perfect. And real fast, I've got it hooked into a Fender twin cab that's here because it's 4 ohms. Let's make sure it sounds okay. And then we'll hook it up to its old 1973 Oxford 8-inch speaker, which is often an awful sounding thing. But if we need to replace that speaker, better sounding new ones are only about 35, 40 bucks. And where's the guitar cable I just had here a minute ago? Well, even before it's into its intended speaker, it sounds really boxy, as the Champ does. And doesn't have a ton of gain. But it is what it is. That said, the reason these things tend to be really boxy is, in my opinion, Fender crippled these in comparison to the Princeton, so that this wouldn't sound anywhere as good as a Princeton. And they put in a 15K fixed mids resistor versus the 6.8K in the Deluxe Reverb, and many other Fender amps of that era. And that 15K is just a little bit twice the value of the original and most other larger Fenders. And it's actually 30% more than you find on a twin, which has the same tone stack with its mid pots maxed out. And you put that in conjunction with a little 8-inch speaker and a little bitty open back cab, and it's just box city. So I'm going to put a resistor in parallel with that 15K off that bass pot, which I have done for some other people, and it really makes the amp sound nicer. And I'm going to let the owner hear it, and if he doesn't like it, I can take it out, you know. But I think it's just such a no-brainer improvement to make to these things, because man, it's just mid-city, and the tone stack doesn't do much with that much mids. So let me do that real quick, then we'll hear it through its old speaker and see what that sounds like. All right, forgive the bad lighting, it's losing the light of the day. To no one's surprise, this speaker has seen better days and needs to be changed. So if I play up here on the neck, sounds kind of nice. But if I play anything below, say, this D, speaker shot. Not a real surprise. These 8-inch Oxfords are pretty much the same thing you would find in the door of a Chevy from the time. But you can hear that besides the fact that the speaker is anemic and breaking up on the low notes, the amp itself is sounding really nice. That's with the treble and bass at noon. Once I get the real speaker in there, we can do some other stuff with that. The speaker we're going to go with, I spoke to the owner before shooting this, is an Alnico 8-inch because he primarily uses this amp for harp, but sometimes uses it as a backup guitar amp if his main guitar amp goes out. And I spoke to him about various things, and he's going to bring his harp over here with his mic, his old Bullet and all that. We're going to set it all up once the speaker arrives. And I think we're going to do a non-vintage thing. Given that this is a 73, and he wants to use it all the time and never intends to sell it, I'm going to drill a very, very small hole in the bottom of the chassis where it won't be visible at all. You got to reach inside to access it. And that's going to go between about a 4.7 to 6.8K resistor, which will give this sound for guitar. And a much larger resistor, even larger than the 15K, probably in the 33 to 47K range. We'll find out, which will give it a mid-range boost, not the boxiness of the stock amp, but a little more aggressive for harp use. And I think he'll enjoy being able to go between a raging little harp monster, because on that he'll turn the bass all the way up and the treble almost all the way down, and a lovely guitar amp with just a little bitty discrete switch hidden away from the world. And when his time with this amp has passed, if some collector objects, whatever, man, it's a 73 champ. It's here to make music, not be a museum piece. I wouldn't do that if this were a 64 Twin, or a 68 Marshall or something. But at the end of the day, it's a 73 champ. If that gives this thing two really great usable flavors for harp and for guitar, that's just a no-brainer.